war with Ukraine and Russia, and particularly what happened in the Black Sea with the use of small drones against proper Navy is radical.
That's unbelievable. I think what I read something was like maybe $150 to $200 million a kit. Blew up 40% of the Russian fleet.
We make like our flagship product is the Lightfish, like 10 feet long, solar powered, and payload modular. Ocean is a really hard place to operate. First mission from Rhode Island to Spain was not successful. Measurements are really important to be able to forecast.
Where do you think this industry like really grows over the next 12 to 24 months?
Some of the big drivers, like you are super tuned in on this. A lot of people that I know in like our network and space, we have a lot of overlaps. Like, oh yeah, Dan, his LinkedIn, he's always showing me the craziest stuff on like what's happening out in the world with drones.
The Drone Wars podcast exists to understand where new technologies in the air, space, water, and land domains are taking us. This week on the Drone Wars podcast, we have Mike Flanigan, the co-founder and CEO of SEASATS, awesome San Diego-based company, joining us, and he's going to talk to us about his ultra-low-cost, ultra-long endurance, water-based vehicle platforms. Mike, so I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're working on.
Great. Thanks for having me here, Dan. It's really fun to come through and see Firestorm, launch Firestorm myself. Let's see, I grew up in Rhode Island, so on the East Coast before moving out here to San Diego. I have a mechanical engineering degree before getting soaked up into software, as many people do. And it seems like people say software is eating the world, and it is in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. I've been working in this space, the autonomous maritime space, ASVs or USVs, depending on which segment you're talking to, since about 2011. And that was really started with some friends on the East Coast.
What made you excited to like get into the space?
In Rhode Island, there's boats everywhere. I mean, Rhode Island's the ocean state. It's a teeny state, but has a really rich maritime history. So there's actually, maritime is a huge part of things. And then, like a lot of engineers, a lot of technical background in the space, particularly the group that I grew up with. A lot of dads, a lot of families, some friends who are engineers working on America's Cup stuff, working at Raytheon, working at Newark. So this mix between commercial engineering, civil engineering, all the way to defense work and back and forth. So just, I think a lot of technical inspiration at potlucks and a lot of time around boats as a kid.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like if you're around it, maybe you get drawn into it, right? And then so tell us the story for like how you took that love of maritime that was fostered in Rhode Island and, how we have SEASATS today in San Diego.
Happy to. I guess first off, I'll say, it's not all my story, but I'll tell my part of it, which I'm proud of and happy of. The 2011 chapter, actually like 2011 to 2013, was really initially started by two of my other co-founders, Dylan Rodriguez and Max Kramers. They initially founded up this idea of like message in a bottle. Max had an internship in Spain, and I was like, oh, we should send a message in a bottle across the Atlantic. It's like the odds on message in a bottle is extremely low. So I was like, well, maybe GPS guided. And then that slowly evolved to autonomous boat that could cross the Atlantic. That was initially dreamed up. And I think Dylan pulled me in on one of the early revs. And I was like, oh, this is a summer project, like outside of, teaching sailing and doing summer work. And it was like, oh yeah, this would be like, nights for a summer.
Sure.
Ended up stretching into like 2.5 years. There was a Kickstarter associated with it. There was a company that we traded a catapult for like build materials to the owner of that company. So it was this whole thing that spread out over quite a few years. But that early project was right when some of the major players in our industry today were getting founded. That's Liquid Robotics, which was acquired by Boeing in 2016, Saildrone. Those are both getting founded, I think 2009 era. I might be plus or minus like a year or two there, but they're in still very small scale. And so these early is like, you had the collision of technology costs coming down, like microcontrollers and batteries. It's also hilarious how much better the tech we're using today is than back then. Like there are a lot of things that we're using, like working with some of the same satellite networks. Now some different satellite networks. I mean, Starlink in particular is a major one, but some of the same foundational tech, like solar panels, batteries, charge controllers, microcontrollers, et cetera. And the ecosystem today is so much better.
So in 1 decade, it made like a monumental leap.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it's lucky for some of the new startups today entering this space, like even after SEASATS, we're only about 4 years old now. They're even entering and they're coming in a post Starlink world. They're like, oh, why wouldn't we only use Starlink? And it's like, yeah, I mean, fair enough. If you've got that, and maybe it's a crutch, but fair enough. We didn't have that option. And 10 years ago, you certainly didn't either.
Interesting. So we went from message in a bottle to Spain to a GPS guided autonomous vehicle. And where are you guys kind of today? Like, tell us a little bit about. My favorite thing to actually do was to log on weekly and watch the boat move across the Pacific. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Tell us a little bit about where we are today.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is it's skipping to the end part of our story, but it's a long story. So that's kind of the best part. Is like now the technology, the products that we make, like back in the day, it was a one-way mission. It was a dumb robot. It was like, okay, you launch this thing on a trajectory and it would just carry out that mission. Now you can do things like two-way updates. You can integrate payloads. You can do flexible data pulling software. Like you can store data. You can run AI models on the boat. You can just do all this crazy stuff. So the boats there's a lot of different ways about looking at like intelligent systems and intelligent robots. And one of the theories is like that even if you were to take a human, we're just made up of like a gazillion teeny functional little intelligent parts. It's like, okay, like a cell, if you break it down, is impressive, but it's kind of like just within its boundaries. But then you put it all together and you get this unbelievable system. Our approach at SEASATS is very similar. It's like we have a lot of reliable, intelligent parts, and that's our approach. Like fundamentally, the ocean is a really hard place to operate, focusing on reliable building blocks, and then we put them together, we get a functional system. And I guess to jump to your question, yeah, we just, in March, I believe, we launched a boat from San Diego to Hawaii to kind of do the loop back on that journey. That first mission from Rhode Island to Spain was not successful. So we just had a chance to send one of our products in full product. I mean, this is like right off our product line, the same thing our customers get, like basically zero mods is pretty much the same boat. And one of our other co-founders was talking about it. He's like, yeah, it's the same mission prep, whether it's going out for a 5-minute mission or all the way across the Pacific, which is super cool.
So take a second and tell us a little bit about the product. Like how big is it? What's its payload? Talk about GPS or GPS denied navigation, which is obviously a super hot topic. Let's start with those kind of three things.
Yeah. So at SEASATS, we make like our flagship product is the Lightfish, like 10 feet long, solar powered and payload modular. So really, there's a lot of parallels between like UGV world, the UAV world, and the USV world. It's like, okay, you want to be able to swap out payloads. It's like, this is your truck. It goes from A to B, and we want to either put in like weather quality sensors, like wind and weather stations, or subsurface measurements. Like right now, you've got some really like gnarly hurricanes brewing up down in the Gulf, and it's like measurements are really important to be able to forecast like the intensification of those storms. So you're either putting in like sensors like that, or for the Navy, oftentimes it's like antennas, radars, surveillance equipment. So you put in different sensors. We help plumb the data and power and make sure it's waterproof and get it from A to B, and our boats drive them there.
Yeah. And from a production standpoint, how easy are these things to make?
I'd say like they're quite easy for the boat world, although it is interesting, like coming through and touring through your facility. Like it's interesting looking at, automotive. Like I worked in automotive before being here. And so in like consumer products, and saw things getting made in the, like thousands a day on like consumer goods. And automotive, I mean, I think they're rolling off vehicles like in the Midwest, like every couple of seconds, you've got a finished Ford F-150 coming off the line. We are orders of magnitude slower than that. Sure. So we're talking about like one a week right now. Sure. But for a small company with a small staff building largely here in San Diego, it's still pretty good. I mean, we're kind of catching up to some of the like industry leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like it is scalable from a manufacturing process, which is going to be super key, right? Because we're going to need to build a lot of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And kind of take humans out of the loop a little bit, right?
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global HQ in San Diego. From our custom-built studio inside one of our hero products, a modular industrial-grade manufacturing facility designed to be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours for on-demand drone production. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from top industry leaders, sharing the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and bold predictions that they have for the next 5 to 10 years in autonomous systems and advanced manufacturing. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure you like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, back to the show.
So tell us what you wish you knew when you started the journey, right? Take a moment to reflect and be like, oh God, I wish I had done this, or I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah. That's a great one. I feel like the answer is, one, it's always like, gosh, if you could cut out some of the detour branches that you go down, that just would save so much R&D time and different things. But maybe one of the simpler ones is like finding really good people. It's like, gosh, if we could shortcut and just bring those people on like a year sooner, if you've got the budget for it. But a lot of times it's the search for a good person. It's like the search for the right person to fill a role on the team to help grow that part of the company.
The hiring process is very binary and it's very hard. Like it either is going to work or it is not going to work, right? And so like, what are a couple of the tricks you've learned over the last, what's called decade to figure out, is this person going to be a good fit?
That's a good one. We actually, we have a pretty fun, or like we have a good time with our hiring process. And also it's pretty, like we have quite a few steps and it's kind of our trialed and tested this process a couple of times. And anytime we've been wrong, we can usually point back to a stage in the process where we had the wrong answer, but kind of hand waved over it. Cause usually it's a capabilities thing. We're like, oh, we really need a skill set. We're willing to compromise on all these other areas. That usually ends up being a bad hiring decision. Usually it's someone should check all of these boxes and be a good skill match. And I guess one of the short answers there is we put people in unusual situations. Like we have them get interviewed by people that they won't work with within the company. We have them do kind of like sometimes slightly stressful games. We sometimes do, we always try to be great hosts when we interview because everyone, it's an honor that they're taking the time to interview with us. But we do sometimes stress people out and we don't feel bad about that. Like if we put you in a one-on-one game and then like you lose, it's like, yeah, we want to know what you do at the end and like how you debrief that and how you talk about it. And if someone gets a little salty or a little like really can't handle it or kind of panics, it's like, hey, we deal with high stress stuff at work a lot. Like we send people to customer sites, we send people overseas and they're put in frankly high pressure situations. And we want to know that you're going to be able to perform at work.
That is spectacular. I love that. And it's true, right? Like building any business is a very stressful thing. And you as probably a CEO have learned how to stay really even keeled, but it doesn't come natural for a lot of people. You kind of either have to train it or like it's like a muscle, right? If you don't work it out, you lose it. So talk to me a little bit about some of your customers and where your boats are operating around the world today.
Let's see. We've been lucky with, great customers. This industry has existed and we came in sometimes like people talk about prime mover advantage or first mover advantage. Sometimes there's also a good second mover advantage. Like we were not the first player in this space, but we were able to look at a lot of the pain points. Like myself and some of our co-founders worked at another one of the big competitors and learned a lot of the lessons over the years before going and working elsewhere for a couple of years and then starting SEASATS. So there were quite a few steps between that initial garage project, our CTO, Dylan, actually being like one of the first hires at Ocean Arrow and working there for a long time, kind of learning about the industry. I joined there for a while. We went off and did our own things and then eventually came back to SEASATS. And so the customers that we initially came to work with, we were really looking for this mission of like, okay, practical, scalable. We're going to cut back on some feature set and say, but we're going to deliver this really simply. Sure. And it's going to be really practical. And it's really easy to use and really intuitive. And so we've had the joy of working with like the University of Washington with like a NOAA-backed project, which is like trying to predict like toxic shellfish poisoning due to algal blooms. And so that's like up off the West Coast. We work with the Navy and a couple of different groups. Our work with Task Force 59 is like out in the public about some of the different missions we've done with them. They've been an awesome group to work with in terms of the testing, development, and different payload integrations. Now we've got some international customers we're pretty excited with too. So yeah, we're growing and learning and it's good.
Where do you think this industry like really grows over the next 12 to 24 months? And then I'm going to ask you the same thing, but for like 5 years from now.
Good one. Let's see. Well, the last, 12 to 24 months has been really interesting. And I would say like some of the big drivers, like you are super tuned in on this. A lot of people that I know in like our network and space, we have a lot of overlaps. Are, oh yeah, Dan, his LinkedIn, he's always showing me the craziest stuff on like what's happening out in the world with drones. And it's true. The war with Ukraine and Russia, and particularly what happened in the Black Sea with the use of small drones against a proper Navy, is radical. It changed a lot of people's opinions about the importance of small uncrewed systems in the maritime space, in particular in our sector.
I think what I read something was like maybe $150 to $200 million a kit blew up 40% of the Russian fleet. You can't quote me on that, but that's unbelievable.
Yeah, the ROI or the impact, the asymmetry that people talk about is really hard to fathom. It's like, okay, you have these small, fully remote vehicles taking down ships. And it's it becomes a real threatening problem for any nation like ourselves with a proper built up traditional Navy. It's like, okay, you now need a serious way to counter these USVs. And it's not just Ukraine that's doing it with the help of maybe Western countries. It's like you look in the Red Sea with the Houthis, and it's like, okay, they're also using USVs. And also, if you look at the sink rate on cargo ships, like this is something I read about, there's attacks out there. And it's like, okay, they were launching drone and UAV attacks, causing damages, causing casualties, like really, causing major disruption. No doubt about that. But then they incorporated USVs and sank 2 ships. And it's like, ooh, hitting something at the waterline is a huge problem. You can sink a multi-million-dollar, $100 million worth of assets with something that costs $100,000.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, okay, this now needs real serious consideration about what type of defenses, what types of weaponry are well set to counter this new threat.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen the videos. They're like basically fishing pongas with, a camera and an RF link or a sat link, and they're unmanned. It's incredible. It's not like these people are blowing themselves up. They're driving these things like a RC car into the boats, and they're now moving them in super interesting ways too to avoid, getting shot. It's unbelievable where we've come in a year.
And it's interesting, like it's unfortunate for the world that similar to like the IED problem in the Middle East, it's like the crude version of this technology is easy.
Totally.
Like a crude boat with explosives is easy these days. It's fundamentally, you could take, off the shelf kit.
Yep.
If you can get your hands on explosives, it's like you can do this. That's a problem because that enables all sorts of bad actors to really easily, at a low price point and a low technology sophistication, go cause credible threats that now everyone else needs to figure out how to counter with we don't have good systems to counter those things.
And so does CSATS provide the option to have kind of like the front line of sensors for these type of, if these things are coming at us, both offensively and defensively? Like, how do you guys fit into the story there?
Yeah, it's a good question. CSATS, so our vehicles initially were made, and still right now, like our main product line is really focused on persistent endurance missions. And that's because the longer you have to put people out at sea, the longer you're dealing with all these life support systems and the more expensive it is. So we see really good ROI for our customers when they leave vehicles out for long periods of time. That means that our vehicles actually aren't well set up to go fast right now. We are looking at high-speed variants, but for the current vehicles, they're really well set for fixed infrastructure protection. So if you want to protect a port and have sensors out past, let's say, the initial perimeter, or it's like bad weather and your visibility on your sensors are getting reduced, you can have these roaming incredibly low cost in terms of your maintenance. Like you don't have to pull them in for weeks or months at a time. And you can actually dangle things like hydrophones and listen for underwater threats like UUVs, which are now becoming an issue as well. Yep. And you can do surface level sensing too. So right now, I'd say they fit in very effectively in terms of security for like fixed infrastructure, offshore wind, offshore oil and gas, ports, things like that. Our vessels right now can't do like high-speed escorts of like commercial tankers.
That makes sense. So I want you to kind of be clairvoyant here as much as you can and tell us, where do you think this industry goes in the next half a decade to a decade?
I think that's a super exciting question. And this is a big part of why we're in this at CSATS is I think particularly in the maritime space, it's so obvious that things are going to be heavily automated and there's going to be so much automation. And it's not like we're going to take away people's like pleasure boats going and driving around, and people are, in the car thing, people are like, well, I like driving my car. Fair enough. I do too. But in the ocean, there's a lot of work that's done that's very dangerous and it's very far offshore. And for all of that work, we're going to see more and more and more autonomy. So I think 5 years, certainly 10 years from now, we're going to be seeing like large amounts of autonomous systems. There's a couple interesting gaps there. Like I think actually some places where people initially thought would make a ton of sense, I think will sometimes be slower, like huge tankers and cargo ships. I actually think skeleton crews will be there for a very long time, like maybe even 10 years from now, because people are remarkably good at everything. Like we're so well-rounded. We're the best pocket knife in the world. Like human beings are so intelligent, flexible. We can deal with adversity, problems, and fix something that no one expected would break. So I think for big, like high-risk assets, you'll always have a couple of people on board, but I think there's going to be a huge proliferation of mid-sized and particularly small-sized vehicles that are fully autonomous.
Yeah, and they're out there for weeks, months,
absolutely,
maybe even years.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so where can we find you and where can we find your company?
You can find us in San Diego, and you can find us at SEASATS.com. That's short for Sea Satellites. And if you want to look up the tracking, and watch as our boat finishes the journey from Hawaii to Japan now, that's at track.csats.com.
Cool. And where can people find you personally?
Also here in San Diego, and LinkedIn. I think I'm like Mike Flan or Mike Flanigan or something like that on LinkedIn. And
Great. Well, thanks for coming by and sitting in our mini Excel podcast area.
Thanks for having me, Dan. This has been great. It's awesome. You're doing great things at Launch Firestorm, and this has been a joy.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.